Good evening, Malaysia. Well, this evening I am flying solo. It's my turn. Unfortunately, Syed can't be with us. And nevertheless, we have very interesting guests tonight. We have two specialists in a way. One is a specialist in leadership, and the other is a specialist in, well, I suppose, law as well as reforms. First, we have Roshan Thiran, and we also have Dato S. Ambiga with us this evening. Welcome. Thank you for joining the show. Okay, so we are going to have a relatively short episode tonight because both of our guests have to rush off for, you know, their next appointment. Everybody is busy. Tomorrow is polling day, and in fact, today is our last show before polling day tomorrow. So I guess that's why we have special guests this evening. Now, let me start off with Roshan. You are the founder of Leaderonomics, and well, you've been in the business for many years, especially in the corporate sector. I know you are a bit nervous talking about politics or politicians. Don't worry, I won't ask you questions that will lead you to make defamatory statements. But let me ask you a general question. Yeah, let's start with a general question. You've observed a lot of leaders in the corporate setting, and governing a country is not very much different than running a company. But of course, there are a lot more variables. Now, if you were to look at our leaders in Malaysian politics, do you think you see any? Do you see leaders with the potential to turn Malaysia around? Obviously, the premise is Malaysia is in trouble.
Yep. So
Roshan?
I think, yeah, thanks, Johnson. And I think there is a difference. Managing companies and managing the government, I think, is different now. One is intervention based. I mean, when you run a company, it's about interventions. I think when you run a government and having been involved a bit helping some of the transformation projects in government, it's policy based. So you need to, because you're making tweaks that can affect things, probably not now, but many, many years later. In business, you can make tweaks and it's immediate. You see the results immediately. So I think that's one basis. But that aside, I think we must try and understand leadership from the context that we live in today. And I want to go back to history, because I think we never learn from history as human beings. Because if you look back about 120 to 130 years ago, 1890, there was a guy called Friedrich Nietzsche who said, wow, this is a crazy era, 1890s. Because it's an era of innovation and growth and hyper growth and all these things happening. And he said that leadership is going to be crucial at this time. And the problem of leadership is that the leaders of the day don't have the sixth sense. And what he meant at that time, if you really look at 1890 to about 1915, was that there was the starting of cars, there was electricity, there was light bulbs, there was aeroplanes in 1903, there was a whole bunch of changes, right? I mean, radio, television, all things started to come in. And between 1890 and about 1915, all this hyper growth didn't result in comfort, joy, and wonder, and amazement, and great stuff. Instead, innovation, growth, and all these things actually resulted, if you look at what happened in 1915, was World War I. And there was a Great Depression in the 20s. And then World War II in the 30s. And then until 1945, United Nations coming in, and they put in certain structures and systems. This is how countries are governed. Here's boundaries. Here's Geneva Conventions. Here's this. Until there was certain systems to make sense of what was happening in the world at that time. The world was, the leadership of the world at that time, the Mussolinis, the Hitlers, and so on, they didn't understand the context of the age. And what they did was, we don't understand the context, so let's just fight. Let's just do stuff that do something, right? And if you look back today, right, and I tell that story because, and Friedrich Nietzsche said, you need a sixth sense, not just the five sense of smell, taste, and so on. You need the sixth sense of understanding today's context. Now, 1990 to today, 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, and you started to see the advent of democracy, and you started to see World Wide Web and the internet and digital changes, physical changes with robotics, 3D printing, and automation, and all these things, and biological changes, right, with the human genome mapping projects. all these different things are creating a very transitionary world. And the world was transitionary, when cars came in, they had to move from horses to cars. They had to move from working one shift to 3 shifts with light and electricity and all these things, right? And suddenly I can talk to somebody far away on telephones, and I can hear a guy 1,000 miles away on radio. I mean, these were significant changes that humanity couldn't cope with. And why I say this is corporate leaders struggle, but I think they're starting to get a handle of digitization. They're starting to get a handle of how to do business, how to align my business, especially driven by COVID. But I think politically, right, most countries, and that's why we had the Trump, we had the Bidens, we had the Boris, we had all these leaders exactly like 100 years ago, when there's confusion with the rakyat in terms of what world are we in? I don't understand. I cannot cope with this. And when leadership doesn't understand the contextualization of changes that's happening in the world, we actually have a leaderless world, and that's to me is the biggest problem with leadership.
So
In today,
do Malaysian leaders understand the context in which we live today? Not only in Malaysia, but in a globalized world, how Malaysia fits into everything else.
right? So look back at today's leaders, right? And if a leader is divisive and says it's about race, it's about religion, it's about this, if a leader is not uniting, if a leader is not saying, because you see the challenges are momentous, and we need to unite to understand the challenge and then address the challenge. If we cannot unite to understand, without understanding, there can be no good action, right? So when I look at, and this is my own personal perspective, you have to look at leadership that at least wants to unite, at least wants to say, look, we are in this challenging environment. Let's figure it out together. Let's figure out how, because there's no answers yet, right? It's a transitionary world, at least for the next 10, 15 years, until their standards set in, until we understand. I mean, we don't even know what currency is going to work, right? Is it crypto? Is it even crypto? Is it Bitcoin? Is it Ethereum? Is it US dollar? Is it Malaysian ringgit? Probably not Malaysian ringgit, right? From the looks of it today. But there's confusion, right? Should we buy ringgit, sell ringgit, do this? All these things need a leader to say, look, we may not have the answers, but let's be calm. Let's figure it out together. Let's unite. Let's not have policies based on stupid, meaningless items. Let's figure out things that make sense. And I think if we find those kind of leaders, those are the leaders we need to vote in. Those are leaders we need to unite against, because no leader has an answer, but a leader that's willing to figure out a way towards that transition or that new world is the leader that you want in power.
Yes, thanks, Roshan. So your main point is we must have, at least in the Malaysian context, a leader that unites us, whatever our race, whatever
I think so. It shouldn't,
religion.
it should be a leader that says, I just give you an example on country boundaries, right? Will a country boundary really matter in 50 years' time? Or will people just opt to live in a certain country? We already see digital nomads all around, right?
Exactly.
So what's the purpose of country governance? Right? I mean, and what happens with taxes and all these other things when you have digital nomads, right? But if the leaders don't even talk about this, if the leaders don't even understand there's a transition, if the leaders don't get it, and it's still about, if you don't vote us, our calm, our this, our bangsa, our religion, look at what one of the leaders said about, all the Jews are coming here and this. I mean, this is crazy, right? I mean, the world is moving to a different era, and we are still talking about. This is pre-Berlin Wall stuff, This is really 80s, 70s dogma, right? So I really think that if we want to progress, and honestly, I mean, I was just with a Singaporean. In fact, I think it's a Tun Sambatan's old nephew or a great grand nephew. I mean, I was just having a conversation with him. He's down here to vote, and we were talking about, if we don't really understand what are the key issues, how are you going to govern properly, right? And I think we are not even talking about the real issues, We are talking about secondary, sedimentary, and really non-core issues at all. A lot of the issues being discussed.
Definitely. So I hear you. Going back to your answer earlier, you were talking about how technology or history has changed so many things. But in not the corporate context, but in the political context, democracy has been around since the classical Greek period, right? And Malaysia has had independence since 1957. Now, this question is for you, Ambiga. You are a leader in your own right. You have been the chairperson of BERSIH 2.0. A slight correction there. Our poster is slightly inaccurate. Now, what Roshan has said about uniting has led me to the thought that a sense of integrity is essential. And when I say integrity, it's not just about honesty, but the ability to integrate all factors that are relevant, all issues that are relevant, so that we can lead Malaysia towards, a greater place or to the right destination, however we want to put it. So, from your perspective, Ambiga, what do you think of the leadership that's been offered by politicians in Malaysia today?
Okay, that's a tough question, but what I will, if I could start with this. Sorry, there's an echo, I think. Is that all right? Is it coming out all right?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah. All right. So, is that the core values don't change ever? Okay. Core values of integrity, of responsibility, and some general values on how government should operate and what government is about. All those things don't change. Unfortunately, over the years, and I blame it on our very feudal way of thinking. We haven't come out of the feudal way of thinking, actually. If you look at the way parties are structured, all right. So you have the youth wing, you have the women's wing, and then you have the men, all right. And really, even that you need to change. And I think
Yes.
Muda actually they don't have any of that. So everyone is
Mm-hmm.
equal. So we can't seem to get out of that system at all. It still operates that way. So
Mm.
what we need today is, even though yes, everything is changing, and you may have one solitary leader that you think can change things, but it's more than that. The work involves changing the way the parties and politics operates in this country. So what you are seeing now, if you look at the leaders that we have now, many of them actually still operate from those days. So, which is why you saw that video on the Jews and so on. That's going back to God knows when. I mean, for goodness sakes, we're not able to come out of that. But the race baiting carries on. So Roshan is right. There's no, some of them actually build their base by dividing, whereas
Mm.
others are building it to unite. And somewhere they need to
Mm.
get the message that uniting is far better for the country than it is to divide. But it's about power, and unfortunately,
Mm.
that is one of the issues. But the other core value would be, when I say integrity, would be corruption, fighting corruption. That has
Yes.
overtaken everything in this country. It's endemic. It's in our systems. It's in in whatever offices that we have. And I think that is really 80% of our problems, I reckon, would resolve if we could actually deal with the issue of corruption. So my answer to you, Johnson, is that yeah, we are really still living in the old days. And I think that is where the tuggle and the
Mm.
struggle is.
Mm.
The new faces want to pull us away from that, and the old
Yep.
ones are slamming the brakes and saying we're not changing the way that we're doing things. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So I want to now follow on what Ambiga said. Roshan, Ambiga mentioned that that political leaders,
Yep.
they want to protect their turf and they want to do whatever it takes to win, right?
Yeah.
Fortunately for us, there is at least one coalition that tries to unite the different races, and their membership is open to all races. Now, it appears to me that people need to have personal leadership, in the sense that if we keep waiting, like feudal serfs waiting for the Lord to change things, I don't think that's going to happen, right? So, I mean, maybe I'll just share a little bit. When I was in politics myself, long time ago, I used to blame everything on the government. But then, after a while, I realized, hang on, we elected this government. What am I doing to change this? So, you being an expert in leadership, and I think you must be very aware of Stephen Covey's principle-centered leadership. How do you see that being applied in politics today?
Yeah. Yeah. So remember, I think one of the things that is very interesting to know that people actually naturally reject change. Why? Because change is actually something different, right? Even like, say, I assume most people, right, they will go shopping to buy their groceries in the same place, park in the same area. When they go to office, they always park in the same place, right? Even just altering that and say, no, now you cannot go to Giant, you must go to somewhere else, right?
Creatures of habit.
It's like, oh, what happens, right? Because our brains sort of are wired, right, to always look at things that are different dangerously, because we're wired for survival, and it's always looking for danger, always looking for pain, always looking for stuff, right? And the other thing is that whenever there's a change, there is grief, because you have a separation from so just like that, right, separates you from a loved one, and then you grieve. But when you have a structural change, wow, it's not the same as it was. There's grief, right? And I think many times people forget it. And I think in organizations, we become very good at change management. We understand the grief process. We understand the loss process. And grief has to be replaced with a ceremony, a mourning, a let go. And that process, unfortunately, sometimes we try too hard to change without actually figuring out how to enable grief to happen. So that's one unfortunate pitfall. But it doesn't mean the change is wrong, and many people who don't like change know this. If they keep being, when you change when there's grief, right? The grief process starts with what does it start with? Denial, anger, bargaining, and so on. And if you keep going through that and you refuse to accept the change, it will go back to the old ways. And that's kind of what happened, right, with our government, right? Nobody accepted this, so we went back. But it doesn't mean the change is wrong, right? It probably was the right thing. It's just that there was grief that was not related. So that is one thing political leaders need to understand in government, just like they do in companies, that you need to manage grief. But it's okay. It's natural. Everybody's going to grieve. But we must enable people to go through that process. So that's one thing. I think if there's a change, I think this is something they understand today, in that sense, right? And then when you talk about specifically about so that's in relation to your driving. I think your second point, Johnson, was related to
personal leadership,
right? So I think you are starting to see, and I feel that we can make a little difference. And I run an organization called MAD, Making a Difference, or MAD movement, right? And one of the things we tell kids is that we say, kids, something's wrong with your school. Doesn't mean, because I did this when I was young, right? I remember I didn't have a football field. And I was a bit pissed, near my house, because the playground, after a while, the parents refused to let us play football there because we're disturbing kids. But I sat there and we were complaining, stupid government, stupid this, everything. But after a while, we said, look, let's look around. Surely there's empty lots. And we found an empty lot, but it was full of, like stone and sands. And so we cleared out the land, and then we said, look, how it's very painful. There's no grass, right? And so we started, I personally started this stealing campaign. We go to our own houses and steal grass from our lawns and put it there. And over time, we stole enough from every one of our houses, and we had a nice field. And then we had a field, right? And I always remember, and then monkeys used to come, and we had another problem, and we figured out each problem, how to handle it. And I realized that same concept will apply, right? I can do so much, but my little that I do, right, it has a trickling effect, right? Because it's like a ripple that causes a wave over time. Now, you don't know, maybe it's 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, but it will, right? So if I can help one person, I can enable them, I can move them, I can support them, and that ripple may cause another and another. Now, if many of us galvanize together, right, and we are starting a new portal in January, a volunteer portal, right, to enable NGOs to connect with volunteers and so on and so forth. And I think as everybody in our country starts to have that mindset, I know I can't change a lot, but I can change, but I'm going to manage the grief. And I'm going to, whatever circle of influence that I'm in, if I can successfully move that and influence that circle the best way possible, I tell you, 32 million Malaysians doing this, no matter what force. And we saw that, right, in 2018, right? I am very sure we will start to see transformations, little transformation that will lead to massive transformation. It always starts, I always feel inward out transformation is much stronger than a tops down transformation. Because things that are grown from the bottoms up always have a lot more power than things that are mandated from the tops down. Because compliance And you know this, right? The Singaporeans, the moment they come here, they're
Yeah.
driving fast. Your compliance can last so much, but if you
Mhm.
internalize things, wow, that
Mhm.
one, regardless whether the police or whoever is watching, you still behave accordingly. And corruption has to be
Yeah.
an inward out deployment and change, not an externally forced down line. And true policy, all these things are critical. But if you have both, right? Imagine you have policies that are powerful, right? Structures,
Mhm.
because people behave according to structure. You structure it this way, they behave like that, right? So structures, policies, culture, if you can mandate that tops down, but at the same time, if you have transformation, individual people, leaders all over the country, parents, it starts with the parent, right? Parent is the
Yep.
root of all leadership
Absolutely.
because you are the starting point of leadership, right? You have a family where you are the leader, you're a mother or father, right? I tell you, that's massive transformation. I always sometimes feel depressed, happy, but I always renew and I tell myself, look, as long as there's little hope, as long as there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, we should keep fighting. We should keep pushing forward and do the little that we can do. We cannot control everything, but in our circle of influence, let's do the best we can to control that.
Definitely, definitely. And in fact, I think you have described Stephen Covey's first habit, right? Being proactive. Anyway, you've brought on a very interesting point that one person can affect two, and two can affect three, and soon enough we'll be influencing a whole bunch of people. And that's exactly what BERSIH did. So, if I could now go back to Ambiga and ask you, how how did you all manage to get so many people onto the ground to come out and demand for clean elections? That's one. But if I could also latch on the next question, why wasn't there a BERSIH 6.0? I know it's not fair to ask you, but I was kind of expecting that, with all the messes and the horrible things that have been said by politicians. I was expecting that, and yet that didn't happen. I asked that because I know some of the BERSIH protests actually had a knock-on effect on the results of the elections after that. So, Ambiga, if you could share your thoughts with our viewers.
Okay. So when I took on the leadership of BERSIH 2.0, I thought, free and fair elections, who could possibly not agree with that, right? Well, the government didn't certainly didn't like us very much, and of course, free and fair elections, and that's why kudos to the group who started it, BERSIH 2.0, or rather BERSIH, the first BERSIH, and it's Sivarasa actually who named it BERSIH. Now,
Right.
kudos to them because free and fair elections is a very boring topic. It's not something anyone ever thought about. We just went and voted, and no one ever thought about the effect it was having. So, BERSIH 2.0, the difficulty we had was to make this complex message simple. And that's why we came up with the BERSIH demands. And by the end of it, actually, everybody was talking about the BERSIH demands. They knew about indelible ink. So when you keep the message simple, you can bring people in. And also, there was unhappiness. There's always room for movement, like BERSIH, when there is general unhappiness, when there's unfairness taking place. What you're doing is you're galvanizing people who are similarly dissatisfied with what's going on. But we really never expected the kind of support we got in BERSIH 2.0, actually. It was really, really overwhelming. And part of that reason, let me tell you, is because of the way in which the government attacked us. I think everybody was so shocked at the personal attacks against all of us, that it really angered the public. So that's why don't underestimate the Malaysian people. Even tomorrow, I'm telling you, don't underestimate the Malaysian people. I never underestimate the Malaysian people, okay? And you'll be surprised. And they are prepared to act because, like, they saw change in 2018. That took many cycles, of BERSIH and other
Mm-hmm.
groups. That took many cycles. And I agree with you, Johnson. Perhaps there should have been some consideration of BERSIH 6 because of all the nonsense that was going on. In fact, it was literal raping and looting going on, before our very eyes. and it was very hard to stomach. But then they very quickly dissolved parliament, and so here we are. So the way in which now we can show how we feel about all of this is by going out and voting for whoever would really fight corruption that the way we want them to. So yeah, so for me, it was timing. When you do a right, and of course, I'm not the expert on this. It's Maria and civil society who have been amazing, and they taught me a lot. I mean, I was just this lawyer from this stuffy office. They taught me a lot, but I think at the end of the day, it's timing. When the timing is right, people will come out. And don't forget, we have a Peaceful Assembly Act now, and that came out of BERSIH, actually.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I must say you're very modest. I'm sure your leadership, contributed to the many BERSIH protesters as well. Now, still with Ambiga, we're talking about reform also today. So BERSIH has brought about at least the Peaceful Assembly Act. Now, I suppose part of my expression of disappointment not having BERSIH 6 is because I don't see a lot of what Roshan calls the ground up or inside out or the organic kind of changes that we'd like to see. So I'm wondering whether BERSIH, in a way, as a pressure group for reform, has actually achieved what it set out to do.
Okay, I mean, it has changed. Obviously, it changes with every leader, and I think to be fair to the current leaders, they were there when the government had changed. So obviously, they were working with the government. They managed to put forward some pretty good reforms. They had some committees set up and so on and so forth to look into electoral reform. But yes, I mean, as it went along, it was evident that after Sheraton move, etc., that civil society had to act, and I think the younger generation did do that. I mean, there were many protests by them, but you see, street protests are very important because the government does listen. Government of the day does listen because between elections, that's your only outlet. One is, of course, speaking up, writing articles. But if you want to show the extent of unhappiness of the people, then street protests, peaceful street protests, is the way to do it. So yes, I do think that, and I mean, you should ask Thomas actually his views on this. But I think they were caught in a timing situation as
COVID
well.
as well, yes. Yeah.
Part of it is that, but I do agree that normally every election is preceded by several street rallies. Actually, the last few that you
Yes.
do have, and it's healthy. If it's peaceful, it's a healthy way of showing them what it is we want. And don't forget, not just the Peaceful Assembly, Johnson. There were many changes in the electoral system as well. We have indelible aim,
Yes.
minimum 2 week campaign, all of that. Yeah. So there are changes. It's worthwhile. Yeah.
Yeah. Those are credits to BERSIH that we shouldn't forget. Now, moving on to Roshan. Now, you mentioned culture just now, and I think that is a very, very important aspect of a country or a corporation for that matter, and is not often talked about in Malaysian politics. We have a very toxic culture, no doubt about it, right? It's far too often all about personalities. Now, are there any tips or strategies from the corporate sector that could be applied across the board to Malaysia so that we can shift this unhealthy culture, in terms of politics, corruption, division of race and religion? How do we shift to something more positive?
Yeah.
Roshan.
So culture, if you really break it down, right? Culture is essentially beliefs that are inherent deep down in society. So in companies, right, there are certain beliefs. Oh, my company is a small company. Now, my company is a small company, but small in our mind. My company, at least in Leaderonomics, we believe small means we are agile, we are faster to the customer, we can do more and get things done. But some companies, the same belief, oh, we are small, it means we're not competitive. When a big guy comes in, we run away, right? So in Malaysia, we have certain beliefs, right, that are very inherent. Oh, this is Malaysia lah, what to do? Like that one lah. We talk, and we know this. And if you want to change culture, you actually to change rituals. So in companies, right, if we have certain cultures, we say, okay, how do we change the ritual that reinforces the belief, right? So it works like this. You have certain experiences, and I give you a great example of this is when I moved to New York City in '92, right? They had an election in '93, and the new mayor Rudy Giuliani took over. And in '93 January, I remember New York City was the worst crime city in the world, the murder capital of the world. And I was told, you walk down past basically after 8F, 9F, you just don't go there after 10 p.m. and so on. Now, within 4 years, by '96, I think Disney moved into Times Square, and New York City became one of the top 10 safest cities in the world. And if you listen to what Rudy Giuliani says, it's a cultural change. It's just a cultural change. And he attributes it, he calls his theory the broken window theory. And he said, I did only one thing, right? And he literally did one thing. He basically said, I changed their beliefs. Because many people in '93 felt that New York was a dangerous city. And when you believe that, what do? You carry a gun with you. You carry a protection with you. And when somebody touches you, you just turn and shoot the person, right? And that resulted in so your beliefs translates to actions, and actions translates to results, right? So we see the things that happen in Malaysia, the fact we cannot attract FDI with this. I mean, all these results are a symptom probably of some belief that is causing us to act in a certain way that is causing this result. Now, to change the belief, it's not rhetorics and you say, okay, guys, let's change this. It's not going to happen, right? You actually have to change what's underlying and this is what Rudy Giuliani did. He basically, to change the beliefs, he did this. He positioned policemen to not go and catch murderers. He said, don't bother about murderers. I want you to just go after people who don't pay the subway token of 25 cents or 50 cents. And I want you, in the good old days before the George Floyd, where they could manhandle a person, they would grab this person who jumped over the subway, whack him up, and carry him out. Now, as they did that, they set up mobile police stations, and they booked this guy, and then they took him to court, right, for not paying 50 cents. But what happened was, it was not the people getting caught, it's the people watching and saying, goodness, for 50 cents, they're doing that. What if I steal $5? What if I kill somebody? And as time went on, the perception started to be that New York was a pretty safe city because they're catching even small crimes, right? And I say that point because when we start to look at transformation, right, and culture, right, it actually is about creating new experiences for our rakyat that creates new beliefs, that creates new actions, that create new results, right? And part of what 2018 was is my belief is changed now. There can be a new government, there can be an alternate, right?
Absolutely.
And that gives us hope, right? Because as we start changing experiences, we start changing beliefs, we start changing actions, over time results will change, right? So that's what culture is, right? It's not all this fuzzy stuff, we must look nice, have tall buildings and all, which we thought in the 80s and 90s. But it's not having the world's tallest building. It's about really changing beliefs, and that is through experiences.
Thanks for that. I get that. Now, the question then becomes, because when you also spoke about the cops in New York going after people who don't pay for the subway, that's about enforcement. That's also changing our rituals, isn't it? In Malaysia boleh lah, you are speeding, you get stopped by the cops, you pay a bribe, you get off. Right, so this is also part of the culture, is part of the ritual. So our belief is we are a corrupt society. Things don't work the way they're supposed to. You can buy your way out, right? That's the wrong kind of belief. But you actually mentioned Giuliani, and he showed the kind of leadership that is required to change the rituals that will affect our beliefs. Now, Ambiga, what do you think the rituals are, or the structures are, that will help Malaysians change their beliefs so that we can become a better country?
Okay, it's going to be, I have to go back to the feudalist way of doing things, the way in which our political parties are set up. For a start, I don't like race-based parties. We started with that. We can't seem to get out of it. Um, and I think over the years, because of the love for power, people realized that playing into the fears of the Malaysian people keeps them in power longer. So we need honest brokers actually first before we talk about what they can do for us. We need honest leaders who are going to unite, which is what Roshan said. And I think that's where we are falling down because we keep getting the same leaders over and over again in some form or the other. uh, Nothing is changing. And that's the frustration a lot of people are feeling, actually. Are we ready for the new world? The world out there has got a multitude of problems. Climate change, we may not even have a planet. I mean, we're sitting here talking about all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Does everyone actually understand the impact of climate change at the rate of deforestation and what's going on? I don't think so, and land reclamation and so on and so forth. So they're not understanding the fears of the next generation. So when you talk to the younger ones, and really that's what they should start doing, when you talk to them, their priorities are very, very different because they are so alarmed at what's going on. It seems almost too overwhelming. It's almost something that they can't seem to resolve because nobody is listening. And so, really, I think we need new leaders. I'm sorry. I think that's the answer. I think out with the old ideas and in with the new. I mean, really, it's time. I think we've got to start behaving as if we are in the 21st century, really.
Thanks. Thanks, Ambiga. So that kind of brings us to GE15, right? We still have most of the old leaders. The only person that has stepped down from the position of leadership is Lim Kit Siang. But we still have Mahathir there. He's over 90. We have Muhyiddin. We have Ismail Sabri, Zahid. Even Hadi Awang is still there. So this becomes an issue to the Undi 18 voters, right? So, Roshan, how do you? Okay, I'm going to ask you a political question, but not too sensitive. I hope. How do you see the Undi 18 voters? This thing panning out. Will it be for change, or will they be so disillusioned they don't understand what's going on? They are angry. We're just not going to vote.
Yeah, I think there'll be a combination of there's a lot of confusion and there's a lot of mistrust and there's a lot of real confusion, like who are, everyone seems to be a bad option to some extent. But I don't see outside of one coalition that's trying to unite, that is really trying to have an agenda to look forward. Everyone else is very divisive in nature. So I have faith in our young people. I have faith that they are able to. I look at my son and the way he does research and the way he tries to understand 10 different things and then make a decision based on that. I have a feeling these guys will be able to see through all the confusion, see through all the multiple sort of reporting and miss issues that are coming out there, and be able to sift through and say, look, let's go back to the core, and let's go back to what the country needs at this point in time, and how do we move forward. Now, obviously, there are many other populations which will change the dynamics of the overall votes and so on and so forth. But I do believe as you talk to younger people, the ones who are totally confused will just not bother. I was talking to a young man. In fact, I'm going right after this to talk to a group of younger people on leadership and other things, and I bet we'll end up having a dialogue on the elections. But a lot of them feel they are powerless. And this is a big problem, right? Because we've created this thing, and the Stockholm syndrome, right, where you feel that you can't do anything, even though you're and the scientific term is called learned helplessness, right? It's by a scientist called Martin Seligman, where you're conditioned. In the scientists actually condition dogs, even though they lock a cage and then they electrify the guy, and after a few hours they open up the cage doors and they keep electrifying the dog, but the dog doesn't want to leave the cage even though the doors are open. And this condition is what many Malaysians and younger folks have become. They feel powerless. Not because the doors are not open for them to do something. There are little things they can do. They are not powerless, but they've become conditioned to feel powerless. And I think part of what people like me and others, and if you're a parent, if you are if you're in any community, wherever you are, like you're part of a mosque, part of a church, part of a temple, wherever it is, right? I think part of what our role as older folks is to enable our young people to move out of this zone of feeling powerless, feeling like they're victims. And I've seen, I've met a guy who lost all 4 limbs, no 2 hands and 2 legs, because he had septic poisoning climbing a mountain. Jamie Andrews, and he's come to my house a few times from Scotland, and he says, I can still climb a mountain, I can still run a marathon, I can still swim I can still do this. I have no hands and no legs, and I can do stuff that you cannot do, Roshan. And he's right. He's done stuff that I struggle to do, right? And he says that's because in my mind I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor. And I think Malaysians, we need to move from saying we're not victims, we are survivors. We've survived 60 whole years. Now let's move from being a survivor to thriving as a survivor, to thriving as a nation. And I think it's our time now to stop saying we are victims. Oh, the US, blame Europe, keep blaming the UK for their colonization. Come on, we are no more, whatever, right? Things happen. We may have been victimized at the past, but we have survived that. And now we want to thrive. And we must move away from being powerless.
Thank you. I think what you have raised is very, very important. How we view our reality actually makes our reality. And it's about framing, isn't it? So if I could go to Ambiga, not only did we have Undi 18 come in, right, this new young voters, but there are a lot of automatic voters. And I believe these are people who have that victim mentality. My vote is not going to count anyway, so why bother? But I know you've been very actively encouraging people to come out to vote, especially those who are automatically registered. Now, in relation to reforms, required reforms, do you think SPR should have done more, or the government should have done more to make people realize that they can vote?
Yes, I think there should have been voter education, because you look at what's happening. I mean, I think SPR is doing okay, all right. But look, many postal votes didn't reach the voters. But look at what Malaysians are doing. Okay, that's why I say it's really kita jaga kita in this country. Okay, and it cannot carry on like that. You cannot run a country like that. And look at how the postal ballots have all come back. Now that's why, like in one of the videos that I did, I said, look at how hard these people are working to make sure their one vote gets back here, and yet we have so many people who are automatically registered, who can't even roll out of bed and walk to the voting booth and vote. But you can't help it. You will get people like that. But I think SPR should have done much more voter education. A lot of people do not understand the automatic voter registration. They don't realize that they're automatically registered. So, and also, I should tell you some figures, Johnson. There are about 4 over million, all right, who never bothered to register, even for the last 4 over million. Now we have 1.5 plus million 18-year-olds, right? So that's a big group. But as I say, many of them don't realize they're registered. Many of them don't realize they can vote. And they don't like to go through this process, going to the post office, this, that, they can't be bothered. But unfortunately, the message hasn't got to them that they can actually vote. So, I think, and just coming back to this question of politics, I just wanted to say 2 short things, Johnson. One about age. It's not even about age so much. It's about new faces with new ideas, okay? Because we don't want to be accused of being ageist, right? But it is getting the same people who we've been seeing over and over again. They need to step back. They really have to step back, because they're not dealing with the new challenges that are facing our youngsters. So that's one thing. Number 2, we must bring in the fixed term prime ministership. 2 terms and out. And then no matter how good you are, sorry, you don't come back. That's the only way you can ensure rejuvenation at every after a reasonable period of time. Yeah, just those two additional points.
Okay, thank you. So it's already 6:45, and I promised to let you all go by 6:45, and I will keep my word. So thank you very much, Roshan
Thank you.
and Ambiga, for being with us this evening. Happy voting tomorrow, and I hope you will continue to encourage your friends and family to
Yes.
vote.
Happy
Thank
voting.
you, everyone.
Thanks, Johnson. Thank you. Bye bye then.
Bye-bye.
Right. So now we have a little time to ourselves, and actually, some of the news of the day that I wanted to share was mentioned just now. I don't know if you all caught that, but one of the things that was a very hot story today was what Muhyiddin said yesterday. Nope, not this item. This item. Now, this item is talking about Rafizi wanting to sue, or rather to file polls petition over Muhyiddin's remarks about the Christianization claim. This is only one of the stories. Then there is another one with Lim Kit Siang saying, prove your Christianization claim. And there's yet another one, Churches Council slams Muhyiddin over Christianization. And I believe earlier today as well, Anwar also said that Muhyiddin has lost all ideas on what else to use to win in this election. That's why he's resorted to this extreme remarks about this Jewish or Christian conspiracy for Malaysia. Well, I didn't expect that to come from Muhyiddin, but well, he did, and I think he's really put his foot in his mouth this time. Now, moving on, we have another item that is quite relevant. The SPR has now announced that the Padang Serai election is set for December 7th. This is because one of the candidates actually passed away a little while ago. So the nomination day has now moved to what is it? It will be on the 24th, and the election, the voting will be on December 3rd for Padang Serai voters. Okay. Now, another piece of news, interesting. This postal voter actually received 2 ballot papers with different serial numbers. Does that mean some people are able to vote more than once? This is a very interesting question. In fact, there was a little while back that I received a few WhatsApp messages that asked me, do I have to vote between this time that SPR has set for us? And I began to wonder, is SPR or someone else sending out messages telling people that they should vote at certain times? I wonder if that is actually legal or according to procedures. Okay, moving on. Right, so Zahid is taking a lot of flack. We know that. Let's not talk about that. But what's interesting now, at the 11th hour, Ilham has come out to say Pakatan Harapan is leading the race. But instead of Perikatan being in number 2 position, it's actually Barisan Nasional. Well, we don't have our political analyst, Professor James Chin, with us today, so I won't jump into that and make any silly predictions. But I think it's fair to say it's going to be a very, very tight race. So let me end by just saying that you as a voter can make a difference. So please go out and vote. And I hope you are not in an area where there are floods. In any case, keep yourself safe. And I look forward to seeing you all again. Tomorrow we'll still have one last show, but that will be after the polling. Yeah? And I hope Syed will be with us. And I'm Johnson Chong. See you again. Bye.